Hello, my name is David Richardson, and I'm a PhD student, and hopefully soon a PhD candidate at Arizona State University in the United States. I thought it would be interesting for you to know that I am halfway around the world, and around me are pretty different cultures, languages, and environments than in Moscow. But 100 years after the Vkhutemas was founded, it is still being studied here. In my school, we have many exhibition vitrines filled with case study models of 20th century architectural designs, and many are by Vkhutemas faculty, students, or related designers. So we have student study models of Malevich, Lisitsky's, Gabo and Pevsner's, Nice, Krinsky, Melnikov's, several Chernigovs. You see what I mean. Our students have been studying these designs with case study models for over 30 years, and these constructivist artists produce many of the iconic designs of the last 100 years. My own writing and research is mostly about the Svomas, the State Free Art Studios, which was just before the Vkhutemas. I have written some papers on several topics, and my manuscript has met and passed 100 pages recently, and I'm working on a prospectus. But on to my paper for the Vkhutemas 100 conference. It's called Svomas, Vkhutemas, and the Fine Line Between Order and Chaos. It is more about the fine line part of the title. It's about line quality in art and design, actually. So where to start? This is the end of my presentation, the last slide, but it's also the first slide. It's a book that was published towards the end of the Vkhutemas phase and summarized their early activities. I'll return to it later. Keep the cover in mind. What we know as constructivist architecture was visualized and set in motion by painters and sculptors, arguably more so than by architects, and my paper is about how that happened. The paper is about line quality, which was an important element in the modern conception of space. The changes in line quality of major examples of art design and their explanations in the accompanying text are insights into the development of and progression of modern thought. So a trend towards finer and finer line work that was exhibited in the works and statements of the leading architects in painting and sculpture is in dialogue with a sense of architectonics and engineering accuracy. A little earlier, though, was this very early Kandinsky from 1906 or 7 in a museum in Munich, painted a while before the Vkhutemas was founded. So one logic in art and understanding art is a reading in terms of movements, which is common in art history. You see plenty of movements. This shows what you might call pointillism by an artist that is not really associated as much with pointillism, Vasily Kandinsky, but he did some pointillistic works and experiments in points. Next, we have Malevich's knife grinder of 1912 or 13 shown here. It's at a museum at Yale. It shows an example of cubo-futurist interest in planes, experiments in depicting these planes in volumes in cubist or cubo-futurist space. Malevich is not strictly cubo-futurist, but he went through this kind of phase. And next we have Ryona, titled Stiklo, painted in 1912 and held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. What's interesting is the Ryona's line quality here. Experiments in line before the Vkhutemas have a different sort of line work. The last three slides were made in terms of some elemental modernist units of art. This one is about lines and rays. You see in art history ism suffixes that are led by their prefix meaning as the start, such as pointillism employing the point as the start. Cubism was named because of an appearance of cubic volumes used as the start. Rayonism took the ray of light as a start. And graphical and geometric logic unrelated their original understandings are subsequent appreciations and the way those movements developed. And constructivism in art was different. It was more of a process. Construction is a process, right? And the line quality here is akin to something you might see on a drafting table of an architect or a civil engineer, not as much as what you would see on the easel of a painter or in the workshop of a sculptor. So to compare the line quality of Rayonist art with the line quality of constructivist art, like the two we looked at last, so to examine Rayonist drawings and paintings, it shows that a measurably thicker and uneven edge, often brushed linear stroke, is a recurring feature. Whereas the constructive line, most often either was of a more minimal thickness or an unevenness approaching zero in graphic applications. In sculpture and architecture, such as the monument to the Third International at the right, there's an appropriate material thickness due to the tensile or compressive material strengths, often given as a property to the line work. between Rayonism and constructivism, brushmark often would gradually tend towards this trend in sharper and finer lines. So between that time of Rayonism and constructivism, the trend was towards finer and sharper lines. So in a 1919 essay called Online by Vasily Kandinsky, he recognized point and line as the big questions of that time, and especially for graphical artists, as they derive the resources for a whole realm of art. During the Svomas years, the chaotic and tumultuous educational situation continued to yield a freer quality of line and edge, and much of the exemplary art and design produced there. But this was coming to an end, and this was a trend tending to the out. It was kind of heading out. So, but brush and easel painting were subtly and impactfully changing, evolving further around the years 1918 1920. Perhaps more so than usual, art and design were in flux, and stability was being intentionally reconsidered. The experiments were more about search and exploration than order and rigorous testing. Yet beginnings of those were apparent, and art and architecture were being reconsidered in a way. They considered key theories and theses more in terms of synthesis of the arts than antithesis. So the question of line raised earlier by Kandinsky was a careful consideration, a honing and fine-tuning of line work around the beginning of the Vkhutemas. Whether it was a segment between points or the linear edge of a plane, there was a growing need for accurate drawing by instrumental means. This is a great quote on your screen by Alexander Rodchenko for Institute of Artistic Culture Incook lecture in 1921. The lecture was called Line, that expresses how the legitimacy of drafting had gone to influence painting and graphic design. The way to make finer lines is expedited by mechanical pencils, pens, templates such as triangles, rulers, and compasses. There were architectural instruments. These were architectural instruments, but also became important symbols of artists and designers, as you will see later in the next few slides. The compass became a kind of iconic symbol for changes in the way art was made. The trend towards fine line in art and design after the Svomas to Vkhutemas transition is evident in many works. Many of the sculptural or architectural work around 1920 also displayed the trend in finer and finer line through the utilization of trusses and frames. Examples range from Tatlin's monument to the Third International, to Lissitzky's Lenin Tribune, to KPS series shown here by the student group Amoku, and also I would include a lot of the Meyerhold productions for theater in this trend towards trusses and frames as a type of linear design. But with respect to graphics, which could approach or approximate diagrammatically infinite thinness, architectural sculpture was also preoccupied with line, but more in terms of linear materials that carried different implications. To construct or design constructions out of linear pieces, these designers needed appropriate dimensional sizing and proportions of the woods and metals that they were using. So they needed to consider the material capacities and loaded structural configurations, which is different than in graphics where you can draw anything. So they also challenged these capacities and structures in ways that continue to be discussed. Architecture took something on board from the artistic experiments, but already had the drafting equipment. By the time of the Vkhutemas, it was realized that anything is possible on paper. While many architects were historicists stylistically and traditionally academic in their pursuits, the avant-garde architects reconsidered modes of production with the tools of building. Order and chaos were balanced by gravity and more by an equilibrium of measured geometrical lines. So it was less about, gravity was considered, but the way you could draw it, you could draw these kind of possible but impossible types of structures. And iconic graphic examples by leading artists in the early 1920s include this early Vkhutemas emblem by Alexander Vesnin that represented a whole school with a compass, drafting triangle, protractor inscribed in a circle with thin lines. And this is line constructor Rodchenko from 1922, showing Rodchenko holding a compass and a line. There are also photographic portraits by Rodchenko, photographic portraits of Stepanova with drawing tools at the drafting table or drafting with the compass. Also from 1922 was this collage Tatlin at Work by Lissitzky, showing a cropped out photo of Tatlin from one with his Svomas students when they were building the monument to the Third International. But here he is cropped out and looking at these abstractions, and with the architectural instrument of a compass collaged over his eye. Very memorable. And one last example is the upturned hand from the Vkhutemas Architectura booklet in 1927, and the hand is holding a compass, and you've seen it before. These examples show an iconography of the devices used to effectively make lines of finer quality. And architects and engineers' technical drawings had a considerable degree of influence on the artists, and in return, the artists' often radical ideas about the world often influenced the architects. Kandinsky, Lisitsky, Popova, Tavlin, and others were searching for something to do with architectonics and order vis-a-vis chaos, and as instructors they taught the next generation with this in mind. In conclusion, in an examination of the art and design current slightly before and slightly after the Vkhutemas founding year of 1920 reveals an interest in graphical elements such as line, visually evident in both the production and written statements by the artists and designers. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to reading the other papers and viewing the other presentations. Have a great day. Thank you very much.